As we move in to the NFC South, we have the Atlanta Falcons, both finishing as a top 16 pick. Yes, they added Kirk Cousins. He is a 38-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles tear, something like that.
Let me check. Kirk's gonna be he'll be 36 by the end of the year.
Oh, 36. I lied. Okay, so while I think Drake London is a dog, I think Bijan Robinson is a dog. I think Kyle Pitts can be a dog. I really like Darnell Mooney as their wide receiver 2. I think he's a better wide receiver 3. Zach Robinson is their OC. Is going to be very interested to see, what they do. They used their 8th overall pick for Michael Penix when they could have drafted the best defensive player in the draft, regardless who you thought that was. Their defense still needs a little bit of work. That defensive line is questionable. So I think the defense is really going to be the issue here. Now, hopefully you bring in a guy like Raheem Morris, who is a defensive-minded head coach, who's able to raise the floor of that defense. But I can see this team being kind of just like, there's so many new parts where it's like it's going to take them a while to mesh. And while they might be better, as a whole, like moving as a whole, and it might not look as wonky as last year's 7-10 finish, I could see them finishing in the, bottom 16 of the league and not really getting things going until 2025, if that makes sense.
No, and that's exactly how I view it too. And again, this is just floors. Like you have to have a floor. The floor for the Falcons, it would just be disrespectful to the other teams that we have, right? In this range of barely missing the playoffs, early playoff exit. Everyone that we had fitting into that range is teams that have either been in the playoffs very recently or made a run in the playoffs very recently, right? Like we couldn't just throw the Falcons in that range. It would actually just be unfair to everyone else that we have in that range. The floor for the Falcons, the bottom line is just from what they've shown us, the pedigree, the uncertainty in the new staff, because you can't evaluate what you haven't seen yet. Like, yeah, they have a hell of an O-line. There's still a lot of question marks on the defensive side. There's definitely still questions in the offensive corps. And yeah, in the ideal world, Kirk Cousins comes in and changes everything, and there's an 11-5, 12 and, you know what I mean? It's 12-4 type of whatever, 12-5, 11-6 type of season. But it can very well lean 50-50. That's kind of the bottom line with the Falcons.
No, yeah, it's going to be, I feel like no matter what, unless the Falcons win a playoff game this year, I think there are some Falcons fans or just general expectations from the Falcons that they're automatically going to be like a Super Bowl contender. I think the expectations are far too high for the Falcons this year. I think they need to be leveled out this year. Not saying they can't be that. I'm just saying like there's a lot of moving parts, and I think people are a little too high on them this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do. Moving into our next team, probably one of the easiest selections in here, we're going to put the Carolina Panthers as the top 3 pick. They upgraded the interior of the O-line. The O-line should regress positively more towards average compared to what it was last year. You upgraded your wide receiver room. You upgraded your running back room. But you lose probably your best player on defense in Brian Burns. So you have J.C. Horn, who's kind of been injury prone throughout his career. And, what if Bryce Young doesn't take that step with Dave Canales? I mean, I think it was a good pick for him. Like a good OC pick for Bryce Young after what he's done with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. But the reality is the Panthers roster is not very good. In the past, they have not drafted that well. I understand it's a new GM and everything like that, but it's going to take some time. And I just, you have Deontay Johnson, you have Adam Thielen, you have, Xavier Legette. I still think they could have done a better job picking up receiver. I don't know if Legette was the best option for them just because of, you're trying to develop Bryce Young. Why are you going to take a project in a wide receiver? Why not get the sure thing? So it's going to be interesting this year. I still think the Panthers are probably a favorite to have a top pick, and they'll actually have it this year. So if I had to pick the worst teams in the league, the ones we have in the top 3 pick, like that was what I would feel the most confident about.
No, yeah. And again, like the Panthers are, look, Panthers fans, because I hear you guys, acting like a lot of people act like there's been no changes. No, there has been. And again, in terms of like the direction for the future, kind of like even because I don't want to say similar to the Vikings because the Vikings have a lot more of the groundwork already in place. But I can see like what the Panthers have planned down the road, right? And it's
Right.
like they're moving towards that, and I can see it. And I think that in terms of like what you have down the road is not it's not really the worst thing in the world. And it actually is probably eventually a playoff berth with Bryce Young, because I do still believe in Bryce Young. I do still believe that the way they've been filling out this O line, if you guys can just get the skill position figured out to the point where, and again, the defense is playing good enough where they can balance out, I think that we could even see the Panthers potentially be a playoff team by the end of the Bryce Young rookie contract, which sounds crazy perhaps right now. But again, I had a lot of faith in Bryce pre-draft process. I still have a lot of faith in Bryce. Came down to the fact that the Panthers O-line last year was literally absolutely horrendous. Skill position players not doing their job, not separating. That's why you brought in Deontay Johnson. That's what you're hoping Xavier Legette is. And then, aside from that, move over to the defense. You added a few guys that are like, okay, yeah, I'm seeing the vision. Like, yeah, Josie Jewell, Wanham, Clowney, good names to add, right? But are they guys that completely move the needle for this immediate future where all of a sudden defense is going to be some world-beating defense and change the game? No, absolutely not. So again, in terms of like the future, like I see it. It's slow, it's baby steps for the Panthers. But this year, I don't think it's going to be much of a jump, if really much, if any jump in terms of like wins, loss. And it's like there's still a lot of building that has to be done, but I see the vision, if that makes any sense.
Moving in to the New Orleans Saints, we have them both as a top 10 pick. I think while the Saints have a lower floor, like the second lowest tier, I don't really see them getting to that, especially with the new offensive coordinator and, hopefully players in their young ages taking that step. I think, the defense is pretty decent. I think you worry about the defensive line a little bit, possibly if Lattimore gets moved. That could see a downgrade in the DB room. But I think it's really going to depend on how much Derek Carr meshes with Clint Kubiak this year, and if Olave can kind of take that next step that we know he can. Like, he is a very talented receiver. I just think he's been kind of bordering that line between all-star and superstar.
Oh, well, I'll tell you as a Saints fan. No, that's like the best way you could say it, 1,000%. And every Saints fan wants to see him reach that superstar tier, but there's just a few little nuances in the game that we gotta get kinked out, right? He has to figure out the little things. But in terms of his skill and ceiling, it's all there. And I think that also goes into him getting more rapport with Derek Carr, building more of chemistry this offseason, which I really hope they've been doing. I really hope that is what we see this year, as a Saints fan, obviously. But again, and I have them as a top 10 pick as the floor myself, too. So, no bias going in here. Like, the reality is the Saints could have a very poor season. But also, with that being said, they're also, again, they're one of those teams that's in a very polarizing tier, because the way that Derek Carr ended the year last year, and now you're improving the offensive coordinator a lot over Pete Carmichael, what we expect at least. And then, yeah, what you said about the defense, I'm with you 1,000%. Like, it's more like the Dennis Allen scheme you have a ton of faith in. There's definitely some question marks across the defense in terms of like the talent on the defense. You have a lot of faith as a Saints fan that Dennis Allen's going to keep things tight and at least keep it organized, that even if people aren't performing up to standard, the scheme just keeps everything in front of us to the point where we can still be a productive defense, even if not one of the best defenses in the league that we used to have a couple seasons ago. But the bottom line is, in terms of talent overall, and when you include that with Derek Carr, there's definitely volatility where the Saints could have a very poor year. Again, it could also be another side of things where if all the skill position guys make a huge jump, the O-line, the young guys make a big jump, could be the opposite. But realistically, with what we know about Derek Carr now, I had to lean more towards just the top 10, and they could have a really rough year in terms of that's what is very possible. And that's the floor, and that's the reality.
I think that's the big thing, is there's so many question marks when it comes to, will Dennis Allen be the long-term head coach? Will Derek Carr be the long-term head coach? Like, this season, while they may not be competing for a deep run, I think the organization is looking for a lot of answers.
No, exactly.
Moving in to our last team of the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a top 16 pick. So my concern with the Buccaneers is that the interior, the O-line struggles. Yes, they brought in Graham Barton, which I do like. But, it's going to be an interesting year because you have a new OC with Baker Mayfield. We saw what Dave Canales was able to do with him. They bring in, Bucky Irving. They have Rashad White. Overall, the Buccaneers are a good roster. Like, they are one of the most solid rosters through and through, I believe, in the NFL. I just feel like with the aging vets and Baker Mayfield kind of having up and down, career, I could see the regression where they are one of the bottom 16 teams of the league. And when I say that, I think they would be like 15 or 16. Like, like the Colts or the Seahawks type of thing. Like, they only picked, what they picked, 23rd? Wait, what, they picked 20th this year? Or no, that was the Steelers. It was with they picked 26th, actually. I'm lying because they went to the playoffs. But I just think with the way that the roster is built through Tampa Bay, it is a real possibility that they could finish as one of the bottom 16 teams in terms of draft position.
No, and again, it's possible. And I go back to exactly what you started with. Like, and we've talked about this a lot. Bucks interior, right? You assume, right? As everyone, like, to get back to the fans always think positively thing. Like, yeah, if you're a Bucks fan, you're saying like Graham Barton's going to come in and fix the issues. Like, he was our first round pick, and that's what he's going to do. Well, you could point to a super recent example: the Giants last year. John Michael Schmidt, high round pick, center. He's going to come in, help us fix the interior line issue. Lowest graded center in the entire league last year. Certainly wasn't helping anything. And not that John Michael Schmidt can't improve and become a better center, but this isn't about John Michael Schmidt and the Vikings. The point is, and the Giants. The point is, this is about the Bucks, but I can correlate that example to the Bucks. Like, just because you spend a high round pick on a guy and you have high expectations for him, it doesn't always work out that way, right? Like, it's right. In a perfect world, all your high round picks work out. Well, I'll tell you, as a Saints fan, it just doesn't, it just doesn't go that way sometimes, and that's the reality situation. So if it's another year like that, and Graham Barton doesn't translate the first year, he has a really rough first year, you're in a position, and the other two guys, your left guard and your right guard, don't make a jump. You're in a position where, like, man, oh man, 3 of our 5 O-line slots are like really bad, and that's never a situation you want to be in, no matter how talented the skill positions are, like the Buccaneers. And you have faith in Baker Mayfield, obviously, but it's a different situation now, right? Like, new offensive coordinator. And on the defensive side, there's just a lot of questions around the pass rush, right? Like, they don't have really a dominant, they don't have a dominant pass rush. They don't have an alpha pass rusher. And that someone needs to emerge as that guy. So there's questions for the Bucks for sure. And if they can answer or not is something we're gonna have to wait to see. And that's why I feel like we have them in that perfect range where, to your point, if they fizzle out and they go towards the bottom of what were our expectations, it's not like they're gonna crash and burn. They would just barely miss the playoffs, and then Todd Bowles would be out the door, and it would be kind of a fresh start, which was almost what a lot of Bucs fans expected to happen last year anyway. So
you could damn near argue, and let me know what you think of this. What the Bucs are doing with, like, Baker Mayfield and keeping their guys around is damn near just kind of a more successful version of what the Steelers are doing, right? Like, they refuse to kind of rebuild. They bring in their guys. They always finish around the league, or around middle of the league, 7-10 or higher, not horrible, just enough to be competitive. But also, like, I know it was Tom Brady, but they had that run. They won those games. Like, we saw it with Baker Mayfield. They won those games. So they're not trying to be the best team. They're just trying to know that they can be hot and be competitive and get to that Super Bowl. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see this year play out for the Bucs. But wrapping up the AFC South, we're going to move into, or NFC South,